Live from the World Wide Web on Wednesday, January 24th, 2024 at 2:59 p.m. Mountain Time. It's the Microsoft Security Insight Show.
And the crowd goes wild. Yeah.
Wow. Listen to that crowd. Crazy. Oh, wow. Wow, the hype.
Good.
Brody's just so excited because he's on a ski trip.
Yeah, I'm totally there right now. Absolutely. Actually, I'm going next week. This is a picture from my heli skiing trip. There you go. That is the Vista. That is the Powder, and those are my compadres on the bottom there. If you can see, viewers, check it out. You know, not a big deal. Heli skiing. I got 51,000 vertical feet to go before I hit 1 million. Not a big deal. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. It's gonna be huge.
Wow. I've heard people count their frequent flyer miles, but not elevation miles. That's new. But you know what? I would do something that was in my vein when I was doing it more actively. I would chronicle my dive hours, but that was sort of necessary too because you know
Get your cert. Yeah.
That, and also letting your doctor know, right? That's something that you know even your primary care physician should sort of know about. How many times you're spending, in a compressed environment, is breathing compressed air and stuff like that. Especially if you're putting a blend in your dive cylinder. I need to go get recertified. I haven't actively dove in a while. But anyway, good afternoon, Brody, and good afternoon, Andrea. I tell you, everything works out. You just hang tough, and the distance will go away. We don't have Roderick here bringing down the show.
Thank God.
Yeah, finally.
Free of Roderick.
It costs us enough money. We will fund the AI tour. Just keep him off the show.
Careful with that comment. But yes, okay, yeah. we need a funding vehicle for the show. If you'd like to sponsor us, please reach out. We'd love to have you. Yeah.
So, Brody, what's your week been like?
Week is going pretty awesome. I work with 2 customers right now. So they're both keeping me very busy. We're looking at reducing privileged access in Azure Active Directory, now Entra ID. We're looking at improving the overall deployment of infrastructure at a customer using infrastructure as code instead of clicking through the buttons, the old-fashioned ways we like to say. I'm working with a customer on a highly customized demonstration to showcase security, identity, compliance, and management capabilities. Can't get more detailed than that. It's very tailored and custom, and I'm kind of figuring it out every day on the fly. So, yeah, that's good. And then we had our Latin America monthly community calls internally at Microsoft today, and they went very well. We've got a bunch of volunteers who are going to be speaking over the course of what we call H2 2024, so up until the end of June, and then past June into what we call FY25 H1. So super interesting, and we also got some worldwide security stuff coming down the pipe internally at Microsoft as well. I got Eric Snyder. He's going to be coming back on. He's going to talk about some cool stuff, and yeah, things are good. Things are good overall. What about you, Andrea?
Don't do that, because then people will think that is my name, and then they start calling me that. But let's see, I have been, I started my new role, but I'm having to go through sort of a certification process. I've been watching videos, answering questions. I feel like I'm a newbie at Microsoft all over again, even though I just hit my 12-year anniversary.
Congrats.
Congratulations. Hey, give it up for Andrea.
Yesterday and the day before, yeah. So doing that kind of stuff, still dealing with some previous customer stuff, just the rigmarole. And totally into this new, it's not a new book series, but new book series to me. If anybody, this is probably not for our audience, but Rebecca Yarros, Fourth Wing. It's a romantasy series, which is, we've got fantasy and romance, totally into it. So I've been reading a lot lately too. So that's my deal.
Nice. Is it spicy?
It is spicy.
Oh yeah. Okay. Can you like get some quotes for us for the next show? Just like some out of context passages. We'd love that.
I can, but it might be too spicy for this place. We might get in trouble.
We'll find out. We'll push the buttons. That's what we do here. We push the buttons.
Let me stop. The juvenile in me was about to take control. It's Dungeons and Dragon meets romance, right? There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as he vanquished the dragon and removed his plate mail armor.
That's pretty tame for what was going through my head. But all right, good. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It wasn't that tame up here. It went through a filter before.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart. Let's
Yeah.
keep doing this long-term filter. I like that.
I'll give you
Yeah.
some details offline later.
Ooh,
Yeah.
offline. Yes. Don't put them in Teams because then the AI lords will find out. We'll have to have
Yeah.
a private
So-
conversation. Yeah.
But
Very
let's
cool.
bring in our guest before this deteriorates too long down the
Yeah.
dirty content line.
Actually, one of the more technical weeks for me. I'm diving more into the MDCA stuff. Went through some
You mean
incident
MBA?
with MDCA. Yeah.
Had to. Sorry, bro. I had to. Yeah.
And so delving into that and had a customer that wanted to go through some very detailed incident response stuff about how we do it, how they think they do it, and some KQL stuff. Oh my God, I got so rusty. But luckily, one of the benefits of having a show of all the outstanding guests that we have, if you don't know the answer, go to somebody who's been on this show. And sure enough, Koji in his repository in Git, I'm like, there's the answer right there. I went into that. Prepping for some training that's going to be coming up here pretty soon. Some little bit of travel also. Did some more MDI stuff because I'm playing around with the readiness PowerShell script. It doesn't work as advertised in the Git, so I'm trying to figure out what's doing it. I think I know. I allow Andrea to run one of her, exploitative PowerShell scripts on a machine of mine, and I can't get rid of all the remnants of it because my dumb butt ran it on a domain controller because she told me to.
There you go.
And now I gotta.
Andrea.
Yeah, but my own premise doesn't connect to my cloud presence, so I didn't AD sync it or Cloud Connect or whatever we're doing these days. So, and I don't really have that much inside of my directory, so I think it's safe for me to blast it to atoms, right? Because there are no default computer groups, a few names and everything. I'm just going to blast it to atoms and rebuild that domain controller, and go from there because I cannot figure out what's going on because something's making the sensor act wonky.
That's usually the best thing to do. Just blow up the DC and rebuild it. Don't bugger around.
Yeah, but nobody needs to log in,
No, build it through code. Build it in Azure.
Yeah, Noodle said, when is the Defender for everything coming, and we can just stop using all the acronyms.
Yeah,
it's already there. It's Defender equals X, and you define X. It's like algebra, right?
Yeah.
And do that. But hey, let's get our guest on. This gentleman has, watched us on the show, listened to it. I watch him and follow him on LinkedIn. I like those who are actually in the trenches. When you're saying that you're a practitioner of it, that's true. I can't say that 100% in what I do because I sell as much as I call myself and hands on the keyboard. So when we can get someone who's actually doing the work, I like hearing their perspective. So we're going to bring our guest on. He's going to introduce himself and talk about what he does and what is the life of a 365 Defender incident responder look like on a day-to-day basis. So let me bring him in, get him off mute, and allow him to introduce yourself. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Edward. Thanks for having me on. Hi.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Purav Desai. I'm a Microsoft 365 incident responder in financial services, and I have over 4 years experience with the whole Microsoft security stack, but huge fan of the show. So thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Thanks for being here.
I'm excited to have you on, and I'm a huge fan of your LinkedIn presence. I might say post because it reads very well to go through some of the stuff, and definitely have learned a couple of things that have helped me actually get better in my job, at least trying to explain what I think you do to potential customers. So you made your title M365 incident responder. That seems very declarative and very direct. Tell me what that means versus a incident responder.
Yeah, sure. So I would say mainly dealing with kind of Microsoft related incidents. So if for example, in general incident responder, you may be doing like on-prem stuff, right? So looking at like disk images forensically, dealing with like local pivot paths, lateral movement, that kind of stuff, right? But when you say M365, you're more looking at SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, more kind of the cloud side of Microsoft rather than the on-prem side. And yeah, obviously the Defender, M365 Defender kind of covers most of those pillars, from devices to identities to applications. But I'm mainly dealing with sort of the cloud side of it. So
Okay.
that's kind
More
of
on the
what I
more on
meant.
the modern work side, Purav, like more focused on collaboration platforms, or do you also respond to incidents for infrastructure in the cloud?
A little bit on modern collaboration, so stuff like Teams. Also modern workplace, a little bit like on Intune, but again, it's more kind of those underpinning kind of workloads like Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams, I would say.
Cool, thank
you. And when you do that, do you primarily stay within the tool set that's native to the workloads, or do you bring in other things? Because I know that you're not Dart or whatever Microsoft calls their incident response right now. I think it's Merc or something like that. Microsoft, it's Merc.
I'm pretty sure it's Dart. Okay,
it's Microsoft Incident Response something. So do you stay within the tool set, or do you utilize, let's say, let me ask the question more directly. Is KQL part of your tool set that you're in most of the time?
So it's funny you bring up KQL, right? So I know most of you guys are obviously the security practitioners, but there is KQL within Purview Compliance. So there's eDiscovery KQL, but that is keyword query language. And to be honest, I have fed back to the product group, and I'm sharing it here again. Rename one of them, because when I say KQL to people, they don't know whether it's eDiscovery or Sentinel or Defender KQL. But aside from that, I do use KQL across both those workloads. So it is part of my tool set, correct?
Why don't we have Purav just tell us sort of what's my day like? I start in the morning. What's the first thing I do? How does that go? I think that's kind of thing that most people would be interested in, or how about the things I would be interested in?
Yeah, sure. So even though like incident responder is the title, I'd say I'm more in the forensics side, right? And that's kind of what led to the whole unified audit log, which I'm sure we'll get into shortly. So it's more about kind of, as incidents occur, trying to find that evidence which either substantiates, like proves the claims that are made in the incident, or disproves them, right? So for example, someone suspected of sending an email, let's say, or someone downloading a file from SharePoint, you want to get all that evidence so that you can kind of take the necessary actions. And then from like, device perspective, whether you need to get the machine quarantined, contained, etc., but you should have enough evidence gathered to support those claims before you reach out to make those decisions. So I would say I'm definitely more on the forensic side, incident response. I mean, those of people that know DFIR is the common term, right? So DFIR is digital forensics incident response. You can't have one without the other. But I would say I'm definitely more on the kind of forensic side. So my day mainly involves kind of looking at, unified audit log, like Purview audit, and trying to find evidence to, support or disprove claims as part of security incidents that occur.
So would you consider yourself, are you a tier 1 analyst, which is that person who logs on in the morning and starts their day looking at the alerts to decide if they are to be, do you handle them or escalate them, or are you the escalation point?
I would say I'm the escalation point. So I've been a tier 1 analyst in previous roles where you're constantly like refreshing Sentinel until at that time they didn't have the auto refresh. But yeah, so you're constantly kind of looking at alerts and seeing whether they're actually true positives to escalate, or dismissing them as false positives or whatever because of the evidence that you've gathered. But for me currently, yeah, I would say it's more an escalation kind of path. So level 1, level 2 have kind of done what they need to. And now we're really trying to gather those kind of forensic artifacts and support the wider kind of pieces as well in terms of coordinating with other stakeholders and things like that.
Trying to put my hand up here. Oh, there we go. It kind of worked. Phasing in and out of the space-time continuum. How, when you're collecting forensics as part of an investigation, at times I have heard in the past that customers can sabotage their own infrastructure and or logs to a point where the forensics are no longer valid. Like they're blowing up machines before we can gather logs from them, or they say they're making backups, but they're not done in the correct way and fashion to ensure non-repudiation. how do you balance those conversations with customers when you want to get in and actually collect what's going on in a way that can be proven in the court of law, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's where streaming the logs comes in handy so much, right? So anything that occurs in M365 is streamed, I won't say real time, but within like 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the workload. And then I think 24 hours for Azure AD workloads. So at least you've got that data constantly streaming to, Purview Audit or third-party SIEMs or even Sentinel, depending on what you have. But in terms of like the on-prem logs, yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge because you're forwarding the logs to typically some sort of forwarder that will then forward it to a SIM through syslog or SAF, right? So if someone can sort of intercept that, or for example, most users would probably panic if they did something wrong and restart the machine. Well, then you've lost all the memory that's so volatile, right? You can't collect that memory to then analyze it. And again, disk imaging as well. Like you may not maintain the snapshots of the previous copies if machines are restarted and rebooted. So there's certain things like carving, for example. I'm not as much on the on-prem side, but I kind of dabble here and there. So carving is kind of when you're doing your best effort with what's left on the disk to try and reconstruct the original file. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge. And I think the biggest benefit with cloud is that everything's in, well, respectfully, kind of real-time streaming with some latency, right? But at least you can be rest assured that your activity that you do will eventually hit some sort of audit log, as long as the cloud doesn't go down. But I'm sure we'd all panic if that happens. So
yeah, and thank you for answering my intended follow-up question, which was, what's the benefit of collecting this type of information, this type of forensics in the cloud? You nailed it. So we've got a constant stream of logging. That's great. Sorry, Edward, go ahead, bud.
No, I love when he was throwing in some of those terms that sort of identify him as a person that comes into forensics, because I'm working on the course right now. So when you said the word carving, I'm like, duh, that's chapter 2. we're doing this stuff, right? So how did you get to this point? What was the career path to get to this, which is a lead up to another question, that you became an incident responder? Did you start your career off doing it on-prem, and with the prevalence of cloud, you just sort of transition your skills?
So it's a good question. So I started first in desktop support, and then I moved to cyber, right? So when I first all right, you just.
I'm sorry. I was just loving that.
Did you make the same journey?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, same thing. It was like help
awesome.
desk, and then sysadmin, and then all of a sudden security is like a big deal, and now you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, thank you. But yeah, so entered cyber, and the first role, like I mentioned, was a SOC analyst, right? So very much on the front line, very much refreshing Sentinel manually. Back then, you guys didn't have the by-sync correlation, so closing incidents in Sentinel, going to Defender for Cloud, or previously known as Azure Security Center, closing them there. Same with MCAS or MDCA. And to be honest, one thing I wanted to say, Edward, I love the fact you call it MDCA, because when I see MDA, I'm like, what is that? It's MDCA.
Right.
But anyway,
I agree.
So that first role was very much kind of dealing with, alerts. Mostly there used to be false positives, so just kind of dismissing them, and the ones that were a bit spicy, I suppose, would just be escalated, because it wouldn't be in my remit to kind of dive further, right? I always had that kind of natural curiosity, but it wasn't in my remit. So after that, I moved to vulnerability management, which I was mainly using sort of Defender for Endpoint there, because previously the vulnerability, MDVM now was part of MDE, right? Or back then was MDATP. Sorry, we're going on a history of like Microsoft tooling.
WDATP or
long live ATP, yeah. But yeah, so anyway, so I was using like vulnerability management there with Defender for Endpoint, right? So more in the back end. So I'd been dealing with Defender for Endpoint alerts, but what I didn't know is kind of how you configure those, tuning, and also how you would run those KQL queries to report on vulnerabilities, depending on CVSS score, depending on exploitability, things like that. After that, I moved to risk assessment, but again, it was more around Azure risk assessment. So kind of looking at like solution designs for weaknesses before the projects went live. And kind of, educating the business on, hey, you shouldn't have this port open, or, you don't want to have the storage account with anonymous access, things like that, right? And kind of, it was very much, it wasn't a hands-on role, I would say, right? So it was more kind of compliance-y and documentation-y and project reviewing kind of thing. And then I moved to kind of EDR deployment. So I was basically deploying Defender for Endpoint. And you may notice Defender for Endpoint has been a consistent throughout the roles, right? It's my favorite product across the stack, and I'm fortunate enough to have kind of seen its growth and do different things in it throughout the roles. But when I was doing EDR deployment, that taught me a lot about onboarding, right? So how do you use group policy to onboard? How do you use Intune to onboard, right? How do you configure those like automation levels? How do you configure those use cases for alerting? Side point on that, the evaluation lab was fantastic in that, right? I know you guys are retiring it soon. Very sad about it. Did post about it in the CCP. Hopefully there's a replacement.
I hope so
I
too.
would love to see a Defender XDR eval lab without getting off topic, but we'll see. But yeah, MD eval lab came in clutch there because, the client there was using a third-party SIM, right? So they wanted to know how would the alert actually be looking like in the JSON of the SIM kind of logs. And with the API Explorer, as well as Evaluation Lab, you could conduct those simulations, run the API query, and get the whole JSON to then show them what the fields are and things like that. And then, so basically that was my last role before my current role. And then now I'm in incident response. And it's interesting because the closest I've been to this side of it was obviously when I was a SOC analyst. So now I'm actually able to dive in a bit more further, right? To go deeper, especially into the forensics, but also a little bit in terms of the response capabilities as well. But what I will say is all the roles I've been in, I've strategically picked them. If they didn't have Microsoft security, I was like, adios, because I clearly aligned to the vision for Microsoft security since 2019. I've been following the sort of Gartner quadrants closely, and you guys always are leaders in various categories. And I just really, Microsoft invests like $1 billion, maybe more now every year. You guys clearly know what you're doing. You're strategically acquiring Israeli, mostly startups, right? I think you mentioned Adallam on a previous show, which is now MDCA. And I really align to that vision. And I'm just really grateful. And that's my experience so far and what's led me to be an incident responder. Sorry, that was quite a long answer, but hopefully that was useful.
Great answer.
Great answer.
Very good answer. You're right. MDCA is where I cut my teeth upon being hired, and and it will always be MCAS to me. And that alone, I remember the acquisition.
Long live
right?
MCAS.
Long live MCAS, right? And so you did a great job of laying out how where you got to now. So how do you break up if there is any monotony during your day? What in your day makes you go, I've not seen that before? And it may be a false positive, it may just be something, or did you learn a new way to do something you have been doing away? Have you had one of those moments when you go, I've not seen that, so now I have to look at it a different way? Because when you're doing an incident response, everyone we've had on the show, they shout out to Brian, Phoebe, we had a couple others. One of the traits that all of them said that you have to be creative in your thinking, right? What makes your creative mind just light up when you're in your day-to-day job?
That's a good question. I would say if it's so specifically around auditing, right, and forensics, if it's a new record type that I haven't explored. So one that I can think about was SharePoint. So with SharePoint, everyone knows you've got SharePoint lists, right? The way the logs are represented, you don't have a list name. You've got some random list ID. It's like a GUID, right? Which means nothing to no one. So then it led me to think, well, where else is this represented? So I searched for that string and then found another record type which mentioned that as well as the field, and I could kind of marry them up together, right? And that's the whole essence of the deciphering UAL. But that really stunned me. So encountering kind of new fields and new record types, because the audit log is massive, right? I think you guys have 100, at least 200 maybe record types. You're not going to know each of them. And I'm still quite new to Purview audit, relatively, because it's funny, but this time last year, or just before this time last year, I didn't even know about Purview. I'd always been dealing with Sentinel and Defender. So coming into Purview audit, brand new, e-discovery as well, was quite a challenge. But one thing I will say that, to answer your question more specifically, is just different techniques that you see, right? So attackers trying, for example, Teams phishing, for example, right? QR code phishing, things like this. I start thinking about, you have to be a bit creative, Defender for Office, I think, recently came up with an article about how to deal with QR code phishing. But before that, it's more like, okay, well, what do you have in your current arsenal that could help you here, right? Do you have any sandboxes that could detonate to find that URL? You know, can you identify any patterns? If it's an Exchange Online mailbox, can you see who else it went to? Can you purge those emails? So those kind of like methodologies still come in, but I think I'm always really blown away with the different techniques that attackers are using, and I really like kind of seeing phishing campaigns for that reason, because attackers are getting very smarter, and especially with AI and deepfakes, it's just going to be a whole new ball game.
Yeah, I agree. But
Cool.
you know, the phishing attack that never gets old is free. Free Chick-fil-A sandwich, free cup ice cream or something. People love free, right? And you can scrape websites. I saw one that was really relevant to me because I run for a particular shoe brand, and someone was, you know, impersonating their main web portal, site, and it was very good. And it was obviously a credential harvesting and then a redirect to the real site once you got the information that you wanted, right? And then you go from there, which MFA, 8 times out of 10 will defeat. So you were saying a new record typing coming in and doing these things. I'm not a purview, type of guy. That would be more Brody
Type of guy.
type of guy. I'm not a purview type of guy.
Information security. Just saying.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what it is.
So as you do your investigation, let's go to the law enforcement side. Suppose it is a true incident and you're investigating. One of the things I learned when I was consulting, working with an investigation bureau, is the very tool that you are using has to be locked down. Is your investigative medium have to be locked down in a manner like a privileged access workstation? And does that limit your ability to do your job because this thing is so sticks like a stick, you can't change it?
Yeah, so I can't get too much in specifics, but yeah, we do have a specific access mechanism to even, access portals, things like, for example, conditional access, right? Like if any other company was to get, password spray or compromised credentials, the first thing the attacker is going to try is log into their tenant. Now, if you have something like conditional access in place to prevent, or only, allow corporate IPs, that kind of mitigates that threat vector because they wouldn't even be allowed to log into the tenant even with valid credentials. Right. So things like that we would use to access.
Define IP ranges, safe location IP ranges, things like that in conditional access, right? And thanks for taking that terrible question and making it what I was really trying to ask. What were the enforcement mechanisms for you to do your job? I couldn't put it to words.
And even like managed devices and things like that, right? You can, with conditional access, you can add a lot of, pardon the pun, but conditions, right? To make it as restrictive and refined as you want to. And then enforce things like MFA. Sorry, Brody, what were you going to say?
Pardon me. I thought there's a gap there. Yes, and PAW, if you don't know what that is, listeners at home, Privileged Access Workstation. Edward, we should get somebody on who talks PAWs, right? Either PAWs in the cloud or physical PAWs, because that's extremely important for accessing tier 0, right? Your highly privileged work environments. I don't think we get to talk about that enough, but making sure that we have an ultra secure workstation that doesn't expose credentials and is hardened appropriately. That's an important point to note here as part of the investigation. So thank you, Edward. Good call.
Andrew, you know anybody in that arena? That's sort of because it sort of popped up on my radar. I popped up on my radar because of the new Intune announcement and some other stuff. I'm like, I wouldn't know what role that Microsoft does that, like a PAW GBB.
One of the guys I used to work with at Raymond James left Raymond James and came here to work on the PAW team. So I should reach out to him and see if he's still around.
Yeah, that would be very interesting because it seems to be something that it's been around a while, but nobody did it, and now it's on resurfacing. It's coming back.
I still hate doing it, to be honest, because it's the right thing to do, but it's so much extra work.
Yeah, security's more work. I feel that though. It is a pain. I didn't mean that to be snarky. It's like it's real though, right? It can be less accessible for that reason. Having a specific type of credential to only access tier 0 infrastructure using a PAW is the way to go. But there's a lot of structure that needs to be put in place to do that correctly. And when I started working with customers on compromise recovery engagements, that generally isn't a thing a lot of customers when they are compromised, and it quickly becomes a thing very quickly post-compromise due to the recommendations that we provide.
Yeah, I mean, if you are an administrator or a manager of, of an operational infrastructure, it could be a pain. I think how many people push back when you make them log in with an A account, right? A dash A account. You don't get to log in and do your job in the same account that you do you check your email with,
Yep.
right? And solutions are there, that you can separate it logically in technology, but sometimes certain customers go different login, period. This is what you log in, and then you put some type of privilege identity management for even escalation of that account to be able to do the things that you do. But when you go to that, you find that when people work in certain industries like FSI, pharmaceuticals, agency, it, you know, the PAW thing is a big thing because it's what you know, it's who you are, what you know, what you have, and what you can prove. So when you get a lot of those places, you got designated UB keys or security cards that's still going to some of these laptops, right? And you can't say it wasn't you, that's your card, you know, unless you like Tom Cruise. Once you're in the thing, you just pull your whole head off and it's not you, right? In the movie, they
That could
do
happen.
that. Yeah,
That could happen. Hey,
it
Prav,
could.
we got a no good points. That were good points. Prav, we got a question in the chat. Maybe you can help us with that. Some guidance for Adrian. So Adrian says on LinkedIn, what do you do when your workforce is across the globe and you can't use conditional access? Or maybe we can rephrase that. How do I effectively use conditional access for a global organization?
That's an interesting one. The only thing I can think about is maybe having multiple conditional accesses per region, right? So when it's across the globe, maybe you've got like, Asia Pacific, EMEA, like America. You could have specific conditional access policies for those regions for kind of specific groups of users that are in those regions. So that way they can get in, but no one else could get in. That's the
Yeah.
that's the only thing that comes to mind at the moment.
Yeah.
I'd like to
Edward,
take
you
a
want to
shot at.
expand on that?
I want to
Yeah.
take a shot at that. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about SASE, and I'm thinking about our Secure Connect, right? Think about always on VPN and not allowing access if the security posture of the device is not on a trusted network. So to simplify it, the conditional access is checking whether you are on the VPN and that VPN is giving you a trusted IP address or a trusted network of entry to be able to do it. And then while that's fresh in my mind, I was in Houston over the holidays and someone presented on that. How do you deal with multi-global, workforce and put them on? So you go back to the old days where everybody was on the VPN, you didn't allow split tunnel, you didn't do split brain, and everybody stayed on that. And so now that we're doing secure access to the device without having a traditional VPN of sorts, I would think you could tie the conditional access to that to say it always starts at the device. Now, can you break that? I think the only way you break that if someone is insider threat, and that's hard. If someone's just going to do malicious, that's just hard. Now you're talking about a whole different thing of role control, role creep, and necessary privilege and need to know. But I would think if you use our new Edge solution that's coming out, and I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's SASE, always on, Intune posture policies. You would have less of an issue if we did it the way we did it 10, 15 years ago, before the prevalence of bring your own device. You got a company device. That's what it was. It didn't surf on the internet. You didn't get on kiosks. This is what you did. That's not cost effective in most enterprises, right? Who's going to go buy tens of thousands of laptops? That's what I would think you could do it. I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, good points. Good points. And I think you touched on some items there, right? For Adrian, it's not just about regional locking down people to specific IPs. That doesn't scale, right? So you got to look at risk across the board: identity risk, device risk, looking at end user analytics and behavioral anomalies, pattern matching. Edward's logging in all the time from his house in, I know where you live, I won't say it, in the United States, right? All of a sudden he's in North Korea at 3 a.m., but he's still authenticating. Should we let him in? I mean, he's got the password and he's got MFA. Should we let him in? He's on his corporate laptop. Should we let him in? It's kind of a weird location, right? So I think everything needs to go through that dynamic assessment engine, right? Which is like really what powers a lot of the zero trust capabilities of the Microsoft stack, is being able to assess risk in real time and make those decisions instead of making hard and fast rules. Because hard and fast rules are hard to scale.
Yeah, and I think when you get more manual, it's not as efficient, but it's effective. One of the things I learned in the military, we had something called two-person control. You never did any sensitive work without having someone who had equal knowledge and accessibility with you to watch you, right? I would think of a technology thing is it's sort of the way PIM works when you do access reviews, right? Someone has to vouch for you to be able to do this. Now, is that convenient? Security never is. But someone is saying this person wants to do this, either log in and then by virtue of their role. But I could have swore that there was an announcement of a intra identity feature that does what you were trying to describe, Brody. I swear I saw it come out of Alex Simmons' Twitter or something from Microsoft, and I forget the name of it. It sort of it describes exactly what you were talking about, or either the Grimes guy that always put out the interest.
Grimes guy, Mark Grimes. We had him on the show, right? I got him on the show. I love him. He's a good dude. He's a good dude.
Yeah, and yeah, okay.
Prev, what is, without any names, what is the leading cause of incidents with your customers?
Leading cause of incidents.
Let's not say it's customer. Let's just say this is the leading cause of incidents because these folks don't do this.
Yeah. So it can be a mixture of kind of users doing wrong behavior, right? So it could be data exfiltration, for example, inside a threat you touched on earlier, Ed. That could be one. But phishing, I think, is still probably the most prevalent because it's just the easiest way for someone to get in, right? And once they're in, then they can scope out the environment, look to escalate privileges, and kind of go from there. But I think insider threats, especially with I made this point I think recently on LinkedIn, but with all the layoffs and things lately, a lot of people are being disgruntled at their employer or whatever, right? So there's a constant rise in insider threats, and I think I'm not as familiar with it, but Purview Insider Risk Management probably comes in clutch there because from what I know, like you can integrate it with HR systems, so you would know when someone's leaving. And you could say, okay, 30 days before they leave, give me all their activity or start monitoring their activity. So if you see any suspicious kind of exfiltration to USB or to the cloud, to personal emails, whatever, it can kind of alert on that and you can take the remediation action. So I really think insider threats is going to be prevalent this year, especially with all the wide layoffs. And so it's important to kind of get those, and again, it goes back to what you said, Brody, about information protection, right? Protect that data. If someone has access to that data, how are you preventing it from being shared outside? Do you have sensitivity labels set up? Do you have DLP policies set up? Take all the controls that you can to prevent someone from doing it, but also if they then try, you should be able to detect it and kind of educate them or discipline them according, based on your conditions and policies, and whether it's like a first violation or a multiple violation, etc.
My man, that's like half my job these days. Yeah, and it is very important. And yeah, insider risk on the Purview stack. They have adaptive scopes now, which is another way of performing real-time assessment and then taking action without a human, right? Because insider risk before, I'm doing reports. All of a sudden, even if Edward doesn't give notice, all of a sudden Edward's like downloading 10,000 files on SharePoint, deleting 10,000 files on SharePoint, and uploading everything to a sketchy, third-party SaaS application in the cloud. What's Edward doing? This is a pattern of strange behavior, right? Oh, now Edward's putting in his resignation. Like that was reporting, and then you'd have to take action based on that reporting. But now with adaptive scopes, it'll actually take action already, which is what we need. We need more automation. So we see Edward starting to lose it, right? Getting kooky right up here. So either that's Edward himself getting kooky, or someone's got Edward's persona or identity, and we're able to take action again automatically without having to manually go through and investigate the whole situation. Insider risk can either be a disgruntled employee, or it can be someone externally having access to an internal identity to now serve as that insider risk. It's extremely prevalent, and Microsoft's putting a lot of investment in there because a lot of the tools that Microsoft employed and built in that platform actually came from Microsoft, like saying, how do we manage this ourselves, right? How do we stop our own IP from getting out? And then it became a product. So I just think that's a fun story there.
Yeah, and probably one of the linchpins was going back and look at the acquisitions that were a byproduct of what they were doing, sort of led to that. Think of MCAS, right? Look at the behavior patterns. It was huge UBA, user entity behavior and analysis or analytics. And it looked at those things, right? Because when you see someone downloading 50 gig one day, it's not someone downloaded a movie, but someone uploading 50 gig looks
Yeah.
crazy, right? And so I probably can't say it online, so I want about how we do certain business at Microsoft that if you know the products, you can see what's being used. I can look at the URL and tell what's happening with it, right? But yeah, so Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps is probably one of the key components of the way Purview works if it properly implemented. I mean, inside of risk or how that data does, and also some of the things you look at. It's not just necessary nefarious behavior. It's gotten to the point where you can predict attrition because if all of a sudden during the day everybody's going to LinkedIn Jobs or going to Dice and doing all these things, or you may have a personal use violation that everybody likes to search Tinder or Bumble on their lunchtime on personal devices, right? But you still have to be careful. Even though you have people sign that this is a company-owned device, we have the right to inspect, look at everything. Legal people will say there's still a right to privacy even as you do your job, no matter if you supply them with the device to do their thing. And so HR people, why they want all this just introspection and insight, they're dreadfully afraid of it, right? So every time they want to implement something, they run to legal and say, can we do this? And legal will say, well, you can't do this. And then now it's like, well, how would you do this? So I'm not an insider risk person. We've had some insider risk on the show. They shout out to Ingrid Rodriguez. Thanks for helping me out this week. Come back on the show.
Come back on the show.
And do that. So it's not easy. So
Andrea, you got one?
I thought I had a
I was
question.
just going to say, it's funny, when I started, years ago in IT, most of insider risk was just people not meaning to do something malicious, right? They were setting themselves a file, right, to work on at home, sending it to their Gmail or something like that. But I guess it seems that was even 2 or 3 years ago, I would say that to me was much more likely to happen than someone doing something malicious. But Purav, do you feel like that's really shifting and it is much more of those malicious insiders?
I mean, I'd say yes and no. I think, like I said, if someone's all of a sudden been made laid off, right, they're quickly trying to scarper what they can to, get a competitive edge in the next company. So I think
I
that's
guess
definitely
so, but that would never occur to me. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
so that would definitely like fuel that, right? But I think also like what Brody alluded to, if someone was to compromise an actual a user, with a phishing, for example, and then act as that person, understand their behavior, almost like playing that they were that person, but they're not, that also could happen. But I think, yeah, I definitely think the first one more likely, especially this year, with all the big tech layoffs and things like that, definitely insider threats is much more going to be prevalent.
And especially if you're a company that is not purely transactional, but you create. Think about how much intellectual property that certain industries own, right?
Yeah.
If I consulted in pharmaceuticals for a long time in companies that did it, and this was a while back, and then I thought they were leading edge because when you're working on a chemical formula or serum or medicine, one place didn't work on it. Some people worked on one side of it, and some people worked on it's like building a military weapon. This is not Oppenheimer where everybody gets into a town that they built and you build on it. They separate duties, right?
Yeah.
And then they bring those together, and very few people had a single knowledge of it. So, but that was one of the things I saw to mitigate a single person being able to come in and do something catastrophic, right? Like, tech companies. If you were to do a true survey of tech companies, you will find them so inefficient in protecting their property because they're still allowing people to do development localized and not check in and check out because Visual Studio was too heavy, right? To check your stuff in. Git came along, Lab and Hub, and that changed the world, literally. It wasn't the biggest splash I thought it was going to be GitHub and GitLab, and I think it's one more major player, but yeah, good stuff. So, give me a cool tool outside of the Microsoft stack that if you can say, hey, this tool right here is the thing. It helps me
I
out.
like that. Give us a cool tool.
Outside of Microsoft,
Yeah, is there another company outside of Microsoft? I'm not selling out. I'm just making a joke, everybody.
Sounds like you're selling out.
Yeah, I know. It's fine. I need to pay my bills.
I mean, well, it may be a cliche one, but I think CyberChef. I'm not the best user of it, but it's definitely coming clutch with like obfuscated payloads, base64 decoding. There's gunzip or gzip as a form of obfuscation, so it can kind of decode that. And the fact that you can run it on-prem, right? Because a lot of companies may be averse to inputting data to the cloud. I know, Ed, you recently talked about AI apps and things, right? That could be another exfiltration vector.
Mhm.
But, you can run CyberChef locally. So that way, all the data that you send to it to, decode and help you with the investigation is contained within your local instance. So yeah, the main one that comes to mind right now that's not Microsoft would be CyberChef.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but we hear so many tools. I really didn't know what it was until Frank Grimberg told me about it a couple of years ago. Him being a big IR type of person, that was one of his tool set. And I came across something else I was reading, but decoding 64 code stuff. I'm like, all right, what do we have Copilot for? Let's get him doing somebody else to do it.
But one thing on that, right? So before Security Copilot, I think that would have been used. But I think now, I mean, I'm still yet to get hands-on with Security Copilot. If you guys can do anything there, let's see. But I've seen the kind of prototypes and the visuals and the diagrams, right? So when you click the Analyze button, the way it breaks down a heavy obfuscated PowerShell script into 4 lines with like human readable, and it explains that like, okay, this part is HQ local machine where it's planting the registry key. It's so amazing, right? Because for someone to do that without something like Copilot, you'd really need to do a lot of research. I know in the past when I've seen, I think it's called Bootloader, which is like a Trojan that typically obfuscates itself by using HQ local machine in the Windows Phone kind of path. And for me to attribute that to Bootloader, I had to look at external resources, right, like DEFA report and these kind of sites, whereas Security Copilot can do it for you in a flash. So yeah.
Or whatever regenerative AI solution that you want, that you trust that the source data is trustworthy of a sort, right? And being able to do that. But we'll be able to answer that question because we have a resident security copilot, a copilot for security expert within our midst, right? So we'll be able to do that.
Trent's trolling us from the chat. What really is
God.
Security Copilot? And I think, in my opinion, it's Clippy. Really, the base level code for Security Copilot is actually Clippy, and it's been evolving over time. That's
It's been rewriting itself since the 70s for sure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's
Clippy.
my
Ones remember Clippy.
Yeah, bring back Clippy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One day. Satya is like, I think he's ignoring my emails. Hopefully we get that back. And James Smith and YouTube, it's Skynet, Rod. James, let's don't scare people, James.
Skynet.
Talk about the Skynet one. We don't want to talk about that.
Skynet is owned by Elon Musk, but I digress, right? We won't start that. Hey, I'm cool with the dude. He's living his life, Hey, shout out, Elon. Come on the show, brother. You know my number. Call me.
Come on the show. Can you imagine?
You know my number. Call me.
Wow, that would be. I'd have to prep for that show. Probably get some lawyers on for that show.
You need to get drunk and plastered, and then you get him on the show, right? Yeah.
Prep, what else, man? Cool tools. You talked about your day. You talked about day in the life. You talked about common reasons customers get popped. I mean, you got a cool story you can tell without giving any specifics away?
I suppose just exploring kind of Purview audit and e-discovery has been a really cool journey, right? Because, I mean, so I've looked at the documentation and you guys do kind of describe the record types and operations. And for those watching, operations are just like activities, right? So downloading a file, uploading a file, those are activities. But in Microsoft's unified audit log, they're called operations. But what you guys don't do is to show what fields are within that operation. So if a file downloaded occurs, what fields can you have from that support the download? Do you get the IP? You do. Do you get the user agent? You do. But no one would know that unless they generate those events, right? So that's one. And then also some of the fields have these, again, I mentioned it earlier, but these random GUIDs, which means nothing to no one, frankly, right? And my point was like thinking initially that surely Microsoft on the back end would be able to resolve these GUIDs to, more meaningful names. But sometimes you have to use things like Exchange PowerShell or Entra ID search or security and compliance PowerShell. And that's kind of what led me to, shameless self-plug, I suppose, but the GitHub series that, is the title of this talk, the Deciphering UAL, because the unified audit log is, very paramount for incident responders and forensics investigators for Microsoft 365. But it's a hard battle to figure out what it all means. And so I definitely saw that kind of gap in the community content and was like, okay, well, as I learn this, I'm going to share this with people. And I've got 8 parts now. I've been meaning to get part 9 up for quite some time, but it's dragging. But, I've broken down different record types. So, adding someone to a role group, you get the role group ID, you get the role group member, and using Exchange PowerShell, you can decode that. With Teams, you guys recently introduced Zap for Teams. So when you set a Teams protection policy, you can see whether you've got the quarantine notifications and whether Zap's been enabled or not enabled, because an insider threat could turn it off, right? But the most interesting one that I came across, which is actually part 8 of the series, is the table. So the table, for anyone not aware, is the tenant allow block list, right? And typically that's used to prevent emails from coming in from, like, let's say, malicious sources. But again, me with my kind of insider threat perspective thinking, I was like, well, what if an insider threat added URLs that the company did business with to prevent emails from that company to arrive? So for example, Microsoft, right? You guys work with, let's say, Coca-Cola. So someone adds Coca-Cola's domain to the table. Now you're not going to get any emails where Coca-Cola domain is there, right? And then that person is now sabotaging the relationship between, let's say, Microsoft and Coca-Cola. So I've really, enjoyed exploring the UAL. I'm glad that the series is doing well in terms of its reach and reception, and I'm just really keen to put more into it. And I'm also kind of speaking to the product group directly to feed things back. As much as I said, it would be nice if you guys had the fields and the operations and things. I almost don't want it from a selfish perspective because it would put my series out of order, right? So I'd have to come up with something new. But maybe there's something we can collaborate on there. So.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Really cool.
that's a cool story, I thought,
Really
to
cool.
mention. So
the top
Thank
level
you.
domain blocking, was something that made it seem like it was all brand new when we released it last year. If you knew how to do it, but that could be a pink slip evolution, right? If you inadvertently did that, right? So they didn't want that power out, but yeah, that would be. I like this. I like the scenario that you put together, but that absolutely, I cannot put my head around how an external entity could do it.
With creds.
it's
gotta have
it's more an insider threat, so they've already
Yeah.
got permissions,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
somewhat
they're-
disgruntled, or so on. But yeah,
Well, it's in the same line as someone grabs credentials and they happen to be the person that can go change your external DNS entries, right? And
Yeah.
now you're really hosed.
Or
Right?
register other tenants within your subscription. We see that sometimes. That's something we advise customers on compromise recovery. It's like, we don't want this. Let's turn this off. Let's lock this
Well,
down.
That's a lot of admin consent, default stuff that used to be turned on and that you turn that stuff off right now. And matter of fact, Secure Score and a couple other assessments say do not allow, users to do tenant level, consent to certain things in 365, right? And another thing you don't allow them to do was allow them to introduce trials into your subscription. That's another. It seems trivial, but don't allow the average Joe within your thing to go in and open up trials within that. And so that's become
SaaS apps
something.
and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. That makes
And
sense. That makes sense.
someone on my old team at Microsoft, Jared Popperman, wrote a very nice PowerShell KQL query inside MCAS at the time that looked for subscriptions that were not part of the default description of an organization. I mean, someone went out and was using a subscription bought from the Microsoft Store, Microsoft Basic, right? And it didn't line up because that's a risk. Also, it doesn't seem like it, but think about someone being able to go buy these things and enable a tool set because they bought it, added onto their machine, And you would think that if they're logging in with their ID, that the subscription that was assigned to them by their administrator will be prevalent. He wrote a very cool one because they had an incident around that very thing. And yeah, I need to reach out and find. Big shout out to you, Jared. Come on the show.
Thanks,
Don't
And for
freeze in
everyone
Ohio.
who is listening and not watching, we will definitely in the show notes put a link to Purav's GitHub site, so you guys can check that out when you have time.
Yeah, and that was a smooth. Thank you, Andrea. And that was a smooth self advertisement for your GitHub page there, Purav. I must say, that's awesome. I need to read up on this. Can you stream some of your reporting mechanisms to like a Sentinel live alerting, that type of thing?
You can, yeah. So obviously it's just the unified audit log, right? So you do have the what do you call it, O365 management API.
Mhm.
So depending when you set that up, you can send it to, yeah, you can send it to Sentinel through the data connector, or now you guys I think have Content Hub solutions. But if you're using a third-party SIM, then you can stream it through the Office 365 Management API. And that's kind of what I've done towards the bottom of the page, is to say, okay, what's next, right? You found this event, so let's say like tab or entry. What can you do next? You may want to set up a detection so that if this was to happen
Right.
again for specific supply URLs or whatever, you would get notified about it, right? People
Yeah.
getting added to a role group. Maybe you don't want them added to a specific role group with a very high level permission. Set up a detection so that if that was to happen, you can, be aware of it and take the necessary action. Just one thing to
100%.
go back to on your previous point about users creating tenants. I'm so glad that there's a tenant level control to prevent that, because I've definitely seen that in previous organizations
Yeah.
where people would spin up other tenants and they're completely unmanaged. They're definitely not hardened, and it's just another exfil or even infill vector. And if a smart enough attacker was able to kind of laterally move between the tenants, you're not going to have a good day. So it's good that you've got the tenant level control to just prevent users from creating other tenants with a
Yeah,
subscription.
Good call, Purav.
I
Good
got
call.
that. I got that sideways smile because that seems very relevant to what has happened lately, right?
Oh, mhm.
Yeah. So we'll leave it at that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen this in some enterprises where administrative roles have gone in and done these things and had access to a subdomain or something of a legitimate suffix, and they did it because they wanted a, uh, in their mind they were doing a good thing by not developing in production. So they create a subtenant next in it
Oh,
adjacent
yeah.
to it to develop, and then with no B2B or B2C or any external identity true controls, they were able to do it. So you're right. A resourceful enough adversary can see the relationship and just wait, right? I've I've compromised the weak tenant because obviously it's a place where they test and they do that. There's no value in taking them down. Let's wait, because sooner or later they're going to need convenience, and I'm going to get to the main prize. I'll just wait. And so, um, when they create an account inside their test tenant and give it a external identity to the other one without proper control, but you get the picture. You just
Yeah.
wait and you'll get it.
Yeah.
Man, that's good. I don't think like an incident responder. I'm getting better because I'm trying to learn what you guys do, so it doesn't sound like voodoo magic. But it does take a very different type mindset. So let me ask you another question. We're talking about a cool tool, and you were talking about you wish that they would come up with a different a test environment like the one they're getting ready to deprecate. Where do you practice your skill? How do you hone your skill?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say in most corporate environments, right, they're obviously going to be restricted permissions. So for example, a practitioner wanting to get hands-on, you may not get that opportunity because you'd have to justify things and go through approvals and paperwork and so on. So the best way I found is you have the E5 Sandbox Developer Lab that you guys offer, right? 90 days, renewable. I think you need to put a credit card initially, but touch wood, so far I've never been charged. And that gives you an E5, full kind of E5 security and compliance license. I say partially full because sadly, you don't have Defender for Endpoint. Like you have a Defender for Endpoint trial, but it does expire and then you don't get it again. So anyone watching that deals with that, if you can add Defender for Endpoint, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
But without that, you've got the whole essence of Purview. So for example, when I was dealing with Purview e-discovery or even audit, I would like send an email from one user to another user. because, oh, sorry, I should have prefaced this, but that tenant comes with 25 sample users. You know, like anyone watching that sees those Microsoft screenshots with like Megan Bowen and these people, right? They're all fictional Microsoft users that they use, Contoso, etc. All of those are in that demo tenant. So what you can do is you can log in as that user. So let's say I log in as Megan Bowen and I send an email to, I don't know, Diego, I don't know his last name, right? But Diego S, I think. And then I can use eDiscovery to then see if I can pull that email. So that allows me to hone my skills, because then when I go to the workplace and I'm trying to, make that happen again, I'm better clued up to it because I've done it in practice. So I'm aware of the pitfalls. I'm aware of what I had to input in. And equally, because I've got access to Purview Audit, I can see the logs that I'm generating. So I'm almost kind of self-checking myself. And from an insider, again, I keep going to insider threat, but if someone was to use eDiscovery maliciously, you're better equipped to say, well, this is how you could form those detections to look at their behavior. But I think, yeah, to summarize the answer to your question, to hone the skills, I think people really need to spin their own environments.
Yes.
With Azure, you can spin up a free trial. That one does require a credit card. It does expire. Again, anyone that deals with that watching, it's quite frustrating that you can't use the same credit card and phone number again. I wish that could change, because it's easier to get a new credit card than it is a new phone number. But if you have the previous phone number used, you can't use it. So I've had Azure trials in the past, but I don't have one at the moment. But like, yeah, I think that's another good way, right? Because again, your full permissions in those demo tenants. If you're setting up an E5, you're global admin. If you're setting up Azure, you're global admin in Entra. But in your Azure subscriptions, you could be owner, or even at the management group, even at the root management group, and you can really play with Azure policies. You can spin up resources, storage accounts, virtual machines,
Yep.
all of that. So I think you can get much better hands-on through your own
Yep.
tenants.
Nice.
Well,
Great.
I meant to ask that question earlier. Thanks for giving me that, because I'm a big person of spinning stuff up. Well, thank you for coming on to the show. One are more informative on how you do your day-to-day. So continue to do the good things on LinkedIn, right? Brag on you, keep putting you out there. You're welcome to come on. We're recruiting you to become on a host, so Brody and I can take more vacation and do that. So thanks to everybody on the show. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. We're almost out of January, or dry January, they say. Damp for me. And we're looking forward to the next show. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Prav. Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Take care.
Hey, do your thing. Have fun. Thanks for watching.